Bonjour, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci d'être avec nous dans cette nouvelle table ronde.
Hello everybody, welcome to this new round table. Is the international world governance possible? It's a renewal. Is world governance possible while the major organizations like IMF or the World Bank or the World Trade Organization, they cannot be reconciled? Question of sharing economic power, very difficult. So we'll try to address this question with our keynote speakers. Thierry DEREZ, thank you for being us. You are the Director General of FOUREL, a giant in the mutual insurance. FOUREL, you are the President of EY France. I was the chairman till the beginning of the week, actually. Lars-Hendrik, thank you for being us. You're an economist, founder, and president of the International Forum, the Dialogue in Berlin, which brings together actors in politics and economy. Ngaire, you're a professor of economic governance at the University of Oxford. And Dr. Qiyuan XU, chief researcher in social sciences and also deputy director on the Research Center in International Finance. And my first question will be for Lars-Hendrik. So there are already some instances of world governance like IMF, G20, and so on and so forth. And are these organizations adapted to the emergencies of our urgencies of today?
Speak in English. I will try to speak slowly. Obviously, the international order is being challenged, and the sort of what we were discussing in the G20 for many, many years, the rules-based international order, which is based on multilateral institutions, free trade, supply chains, that's all gone. And the world is moving in a different direction. And it's interesting to first maybe think about why is that. And I think one reason why that is that the international rules-based order did not deliver for the people in many ways. And this, I think, is true for the West as much as it is true for what is called the global South. There are, globalization brings some inequalities. I need to combine it with a lot of transfers and social programs. And maybe we didn't do a very good job in that. Even though for the developing world, actually, globalization, if you look at countries like China, a lot of people have come out of poverty. So globalization has also helped a lot of those countries in their terms of the economic development. It didn't solve all the problems if you think about climate and the so-called SDG goals, but it certainly had a lot of benefits. But what the rest of the world is not happy with is the representation, and they have a point, and the double standards of the West vis-a-vis the poor South, or the global South, which is actually not that poor. Some of these countries are developing. So I think there has been the problem. The other issue, technology has changed. I think technology, if you look at what economists call the economics of the superstars, that some companies actually, a lot of them are American, are making a lot of the rent, a lot of the money. And that has also led to a much more active industrial policy of countries. So many, many countries, also in Europe, we're having a big discussion right now, have gotten much more, it's also more French, I might say, has much more industrial policy where the government actually gets into the act. And that, of course, produces more nationalism, if you think about it, and national economic policies. And all of that makes it very difficult, all these developments, technology, economic policies, also fairness, which has put the global rules-based international order, I think, under strain. I think that's my analysis of why that is happening. Now, what can we do, and what is the way forward? And I think that if you mention globalization, if we focus on the governance part here, then you think, of course, WTO, the trade organization, which is in big trouble. Unfortunately, it's in big trouble. You look at the UN, which is, of course, a very special one, but also the IMF and the World Bank. I think they're very much being challenged. And the problem is, the problems we have in the world, we need international cooperation. So you have climate, you have SDGs, as I said. So I see two ways forward. That's sort of my proposal here for the discussion. One way, and we've been discussing it for many, many years, among other things in the G20, is try to reform these multilateral institutions. Save the governance, which is actually produced by the West, Bretton Woods, by us, you know, not with the rest of the world at the table. So try to take them seriously and try to reform the existing organizations. The World Bank is a perfect example of that, with Anji Banga, the new president, trying to reform the World Bank. Some say good luck, because there are two fundamental problems with that. One of them is finance, because whenever you want to have more impact on these issues of climate and SDGs, you need more financing, and in particular more private finance as well. So there's this big discussion, how can we use the public money to attract more private? But the West is going to have to pay more money to the poor. There's discussions about a global tax for the rich. So that issue, given our budgets, and Germany just finished its budget discussions 1 hour ago, so we have a budget now in Germany, but it's very difficult. And France also is not in an easy situation, I think, fiscally. But we need to have more money for the international organizations. Are we willing to do that? Okay. The second issue is governance. If you want to reform, then you need to give others more rights. United States has veto power in, I think, both of these institutions. Looking at the Chinese here, they're asking for more rights. And I haven't seen a politician from a country, even a democratic country, who is giving up power without getting something in return. So the question is, if we want to give more power to the developing countries, what are they doing to get that? In the WTO, for example, I'll come out close, the big issue is China still considered a developing country or not? So I think reforming the existing governance is going to be tough. The alternative, which I think would be worse, is that other institutions are emerging. There's talk by the Africans of creating a special bank for financing. There's the AIIB, which is an infrastructure bank, which is in Shanghai, which we actually tried to prevent from coming, but it's there. And there's the BRICS Plus as a format, which are emerging. So I think we're at a critical point. I'll close in that. We have a transformation of globalization, or maybe a deglobalization. I think it's a transformation of globalization. And the governance which we need for that can either be reform of the existing system, which I would prefer, but it will require some very tough choices by politicians and by people who vote for politicians, or a new governments will be emerging, which will be much more fragmented, and I think will be not as good as what we had so far. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much, sir, for this very clear presentation. I'll hand over the floor to Ngaire Woods. We'll mention the opposition between nations. Lars-Hendrik has talked about nationalism, which is a risk. Should we talk about nationalism when we talk about economic governance? Does the rise of nationalism throughout the world is a synonym with chaos? Does it rhyme with chaos? Thank you for inviting me. I was going to speak French, but I saw that nobody needed the translation headsets. So maybe I will address this in English.
So then, we have seen a huge rise in economic nationalism across the world. This is not just the prospect of Donald Trump. We've seen in President Macron's speech in the Sorbonne not so long ago, in the speech of Jake Sullivan and of President Biden. We've seen in the words of India's Prime Minister, of China's leaders, a new embrace of tariffs, of protectionism, of barriers, a smashing of the rules of cooperation that all of us grew up with. And I think we must understand why. Why is that so politically powerful today? Because here in the Rencontres, a lot of people are talking about the need for cooperation and the need indeed for reform, and I agree with Lars-Hendrik. But in my view, first we have to ask, what is the challenge that politicians are trying to respond to with tariffs, with protectionism, with economic nationalism? And in this short moment, let me point to the three main challenges they're trying to solve. And the first is political. It's jobs, it's incomes, it's less precarious work, particularly for a younger generation. And tariffs have become a first instrument of choice as a way for a politician to say, I will protect you, I will put tariffs on. But what we know in this room is that tariffs are not very effective economically at creating jobs. They're effective politically until the truth is revealed and the jobs are not created. So the first idea I would put on the table is that we need not break trade rules with tariffs. If we look at history and we look at what Franklin D. Roosevelt did in the 1930s, which is to turn back to workers' rights, to turn back to trade unions, to think about the other ways we can protect workers. And in the United States, it immediately lessened the call for tariffs. But more importantly, it created a conduit for working people to rise up through trade unions and to move into politics. And what's true across most of Europe and in the United Kingdom where I live is that the workers' parties and the labor movements have now been completely hijacked by the intellectual and professional class, and no one is left representing workers. So it's an economic problem of jobs, salaries, precariousness, but it's a political problem of representing the people who are most disaffected and most distrustful. So the first thing I would say is we don't need to smash the trade system to solve that problem, but we need to think hard about the other measures to use to solve it. The second reason for economic nationalism is the geopolitical rivalry, with China and the United States in front, but many other countries queuing up to be rivals. And here, what is the argument that we make to a Trump administration about why they should cooperate? The argument is a simple one. It's that they can only win in a geopolitical rivalry with stable, trusted alliances. Second, those stable, trusted alliances will only cover a small number of countries because the rest do not want to be allies. They want to jump in when it suits their interests and otherwise not. There is a new non-aligned impulse in most of the emerging world. And that's why even the economic nationalists will need the international institutions that Lars-Hendrik mentioned. But they won't just be the ones that Europeans are comfortable with, or that, they must include the AIIB, which sits in Beijing, the New Development Bank in Shanghai, the arrangements which developing and emerging economies are making for themselves. And those building blocks will provide a different kind of cooperation and a new way to push for the reforms that Lars-Hendrik mentioned. And then finally, my last point, the third thing that economic nationalists, including in Europe, are responding to is the competition to dominate the high-value technology industries and to use industrial policy and to use trade protectionism to get there. But no country in the world, not China, not the United States, can compete on the technological race without other countries supplying necessary critical minerals and metals, providing markets so that you can produce at scale, and that scale helps you accelerate and beat others on speed. And so even for the technological competition, they will need not just alliances, but international institutions so as to cooperate with the rest. And that would be my argument for why economic nationalism doesn't necessarily mean we're all heading to chaos and a third world war. It does mean we're heading to a different kind of global governance.
Merci. Merci Ngaire Woods. La parole au Dr Yuan.
Floor to Dr. Yuan. So until now, liberalism was relying for a great part on multilateralism. Is this still a fact? Is this still true in 2024?
For your questions. Before I go to the question, I want to reply.
Of course, please.
Yes. Response to the first two speakers. They have mentioned the job, and especially Hendrik has mentioned that the globalization does not deliver to the people. I want to say China is also always criticized by that steal jobs from other countries. But I want to tell you the truth that China's manufacturing sector, our employment is peaked in the year of 12, and then decline by a trend, or we lose the job in average for more than 2 million a year in the manufacturing sector. So if China steals jobs from other countries, so who steals jobs from China? The God or the aliens? Either is not. Actually, I think it's robots, because China is the biggest country to make use of the robots. So with the technology progress, the economic growth very fast, the cake is bigger, but the technology progress does not deliver to the people. So this is what I want to reply to the first point. And let me go to the global multilateralization. Now, China is very difficult to deal with the relationship with the US. Or maybe from the other side, it's the same. I want to tell you a good case to deal with the situation. By the end of 1990s, almost 30 years ago, China, Korea, Japan, we start negotiation for a free trade agreement. But so far, no progress. No, not any progress. But very interesting. China, Japan, and the US, we join in RCEP. I mean the Regional Economic Comprehensive Partnership, which is initiated by the Asian countries, 10 Asian countries. So very interesting. In this way, China, Korea, and Japan, we got the integration. We got a free trade agreement. But why for the three countries we cannot get an agreement? Because we don't like each other. Sometimes China, Japan intention. But when we are friends, but okay, something happened that makes Korean and Japan some conflict. So always conflict among these three countries. But when Asian countries, they initiate the RCEP idea, China and Japan, we like Asian, so it's acceptable for both sides. At the same time, if you give up the opportunity, then the other side will win the game. So we compete to each other, also demand us to join in the RCEP. So it enlightened me that the RCEP, I mean the Asian countries, although they are small countries, but when they 10 united together, they are quite strong. And they can say something to balance between Japan and China's relationship and give an opportunity. And so in this way, I think we can imagine Europe is also a neutral power. Like the Asian country between China and Japan, Europe, I think it could be a neutral power to balance between China and the US. And also China and US should compete to each other to collaborate, to cooperate with EU. So that is the story maybe before the pandemic. I mean the TTC and, not TTC, the TTIP, TTIP between US and Europe. At the same time, on the other hand, CAI between Europe and China. I think only Europe can be the influential and the neutral power to to push forward, to encourage the global economic governance and the multilateralization. Thank you.
On fera réagir Lars-Hendrik RÖLLER aux propos du Dr Yuan, parce que je pense qu'il aura des choses à dire. Mais d'abord, Thierry DEREZ, est-ce qu'il...
First of all, Thierry DEREZ, is it possible today to talk about world governance in terms of economy by steering clear from the idea of economic sovereignty? I think we tend to believe in that. We believe that this will be possible when the German wall collapsed in Germany, everything that prophesied the end of the story at the time. But the end of the story wasn't it a kind of planetary government, whatever its organization may be? But quite rapidly, our hopes, our illusions were dissipated by reality. But nevertheless, I'm talking in French and not in English, for an obvious reason, is that if we want world governance, it will have to speak French. And nevertheless, there are sectors in which a world government works. I'll try to give you two examples. One that is widespread and is spread out in history. Another one which was very short-lived in history. I'll start with the shortest. It's the speed at which we solved the issue, the problem of the CFCs. You remember those gases to protect the ozone layer? Everybody agreed. And it was the scale, the climate, it was very quick. The second example, which is millenary, or dates back to several centuries, is maritime law. Maritime law was a subject that was developed empirically over the centuries, and that led to today. There is one rule that applies on all the seas of the world. And based on these two notions, maybe there are other examples. I'm thinking of the Warsaw Convention in terms of air transport. And from these two examples, which are opposite when in time, what can we draw from this? Maybe the ingredients that are needed to reach world governance. First, necessity, need. Without necessity will do nothing. Necessity, not urgency. Urgency wasn't characterized when you talk about the sea, the rules of the sea. And to react on there should not be losers. Necessity and no losers. If you have win-lose, very human game, will continue, and we will not achieve this world governance. So we may wonder if, except for a major issue that's before us, if all the others are eligible to world governance. So the big subject, I think you've all understood, is climate. Climate, whatever happens. Like for the ozone layer, it's of concern to all of us. And maybe it is the vector, maybe it is the path to achieve this wanted governance. Eric FOUREL's reaction, fragmentation, this rising nationalism, is this the sign that it's the end of the globalization of the economy as we've known it until now? I think it's already been mentioned. Maybe we're at a very important moment. Is it the end of globalization? Obviously not. In the end, we lived the 70 years after the Bretton Woods Agreement, the World Trade Organization. We experienced a rise, a development of this globalization. Jean DEREZ was saying this morning, maybe it was excessive. In particular, Lars recalled this earlier. It left some people on the side of the road, in particular the social scientist David Goodhart. You know, those who were not capable of reacting to this globalization and were anchored in territories that became poorer and poorer because of globalization. So yes, globalization was not a happy moment for everybody. And today we are witness to a shift, to a questioning of the mere existence of this globalization, in particular due to the deindustrialization it gave rise to in Western countries. Not only, you know, the doubts on sanitary sovereignty, energy sovereignty, the COVID pandemic, war in Ukraine, all major questions. So in the end, leading us to wonder if this globalization has any form of efficiency. And this takes us to a pivotal question of climate warming. We see that in the end, the integration of value chains, a mobile phone, for example, that does 17 trips between different countries before reaching the end consumer. So it's probably a factor encouraging climate warming, packaging, so on and so forth. So it's probably one of the causes of the environmental crisis we are experiencing today. And another phenomenon that we're just starting to become aware of when it comes to talk about the risks of globalization, that is data, personal data, the exploitation of our personal data through AI, for example. If it's, of course, concentrated in but a few hands of major private operators or public operators, but who are not necessarily in Europe, don't we run the risk tomorrow of having a social control over our behaviors, and that give rise to big issues? So globalization has reached its limits. And so the fragmentation phenomenon we are witnessing is quite logical, in fact. Will it lead to the death or the risk of a world war through this fragmentation? I would say no. I agree with Ngaire. Despite what's happening, despite the WTO, which is not working well, globalization is doing well. The exports represented 25% of GDP in the 70s. It reached more than 60% during the financial crisis in 2008, and it stayed at 60%, a little less, a little more. But globalization is still there, and we see that international trade in 2022 continued to grow, 2.5% in volume, 10% in value due to inflation. So globalization is continuing to operate, and somehow, despite the fragmentation, we could say that it's a safety net for the world. And we heard this morning Jean Decaisse, talk about Montesquieu, soft trade, peacekeeping and everything. It continues to function. Not in the same way, not with such a simple governance, and of course with strong rivalries between the states. A Europe that has become aware that it couldn't no longer be just sitting there doing nothing, and that it had to react, in particular with a view to a certain number of social dumping events that it has at its borders, the carbon mechanism, for example, competition. 15 seconds, 4 seconds, over. But I would like to tell our friend Qiyuan, in my opinion, Europe will not be neutral. Europe will be committed. It will commit itself for its values. It will commit itself for its humanist values and in its way of taking of considering the mechanisms. I hope that Europe can. The elected representative told us the Brussels effect that we saw in terms of our GPD. Thanks to the extraterritorial mechanism Europe can impose, because it remains the largest consumer, has the largest consumer potential. It can impose new government environmental rules, so and so. Regulations are not a problem for Europe. It's a solution for the new world governance that is at stake here. 20 seconds. The U.S. created the Federal Reserve in 1913, 131 years after their creation. Europe created the ECB 41 years after its creation. Why, in both cases, the issue was to face a crisis, one in the U.S., monetary and financial crisis, and two in Europe, the installation of the euro, the advent of the euro, the necessity, I say, the necessity. So since les rencontres are also yours, I will take questions from the floor.
I'm afraid we can't interpret because the speaker is not using a microphone.
What?
I'm sorry, but we cannot translate because the person is not using a microphone. Okay, so we can have a translation. So when we look at population growth and the forecasts for population growth in the highly developed countries where the prospects for population growth are quite low, whereas in much less developed countries the population growth there is going to be much higher, given that these forecasts in different trends, do these create the necessity that I mentioned earlier? Do we believe that therefore there will be no losers and no winners? Now that I've repeated the question, I'm going to answer it. I think yes, this is one of the elements of necessity. We'll not be able to avoid this or ignore this aspect. The people who come after us will have to take account of this. All of the elements, the art of politics will be to make sure there are no losers and no winners. And that's the most difficult thing. There is a necessity, yes. The fact there are no losers and no winners is more difficult. Does human nature make us feel optimistic about that? At the moment, it's very fashionable to ask lots of questions. And Lars-Hendrik maybe would like to give an answer. People often dissolve parliaments because they in answer to a question instead.
So, no, but I think my point was if you have globalization, I would agree with you, it's not dead, it's going to continue. You also need global rules. And I think that also applies to the Chinese, call them values or call them rules. And I think it's not a criticism of China. I think we in Europe, if we think we're the most open continent in the world, so we're very free, we're very open, we're some accounts more than the United States. But then if globalization produces winners and losers, which it does, then I think we have the responsibility as politicians to tell the people to compensate the losers, if you want, for the winners. And I don't think we've done enough on that. And then if globalization has too many negative effects, it's not the only reason, then of course the people get frustrated. You don't solve my problem. You solve some elite globalization problem and the companies are making more money in trade. But you need to solve the problem of the people. And then they vote for non-democratic parties. This is also true in my country. So I think we need to take that very seriously. I'm for globalization, but it's not a Chinese problem, actually. I mean, China is part of the game, but it's actually a European problem or a German problem that we actually, show that all of this increases benefits to normal people. They care about inflation, they care about healthcare, they care about prices, and they care about jobs. So that's point number one. I think point number two, on China, I cannot resist. Still, there is a question whether China actually does play by the rules we're having right now, and I'm pro-Chinese. I'm too pro-Chinese, actually, in Germany. We have this anti-dumping right now against Chinese electric vehicles, which is a big thing. And of course, Chinese technology is very, very good. And they say it's all innovation, and they're very, very good, and they're going to be very successful. But at the same time, they're also subsidizing. And I think we need a level playing field, and this is what right now we're discussing. And I think there are many people in Europe who want to work with China, not against China, but on climate, for example. But we need also some movement on the Chinese side, because I do think it could be it's subsidies and innovation. It's not one or the other. And therefore, I hope that the discussions the Commission is having right now with China on these electric vehicles will not end up in a trade war, because I think that would be bad also for climate, because electric vehicles are good for climate, but we get a cooperative solution rather than blaming each other.
Ngaire voulait réagir. Et après, je donne la parole au Dr. Yue.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I think it's a little dangerous, or no, it's a little tempting for economists to believe that globalization will simply continue. But it's ignoring some very big political forces that are changing the rules. And it's not that you're going to wake up tomorrow and find it was a bad dream. The rules are being changed. Onshoring is now a norm to protect jobs. Greenshoring for the climate. Friendshoring. Every company in the world is asking, now, not where can we get this cheapest, but where will there be secure supply in political terms for the markets into which we want to sell? The sanctions regimes, which are creating an entirely different calculus for developing and emerging economies, and techno-nationalism, those five forces are upturning the paradigm of globalization, which is very uncomfortable for everybody trained in orthodox economics, because it requires a very different approach to how to get growth and how to be competitive in today's economy.
Réagir, Eric FOUREL
Eric FOUREL, who wanted to make a remark on this subject. Yes. The rules are going to change, and they are changing now. Concerning the question of subsidies, there is a debate at the moment about whether China is respecting the rules of the WTO and is giving too much subsidy for R&D into electric vehicles and batteries. This is an open question, in fact. The WTO rules don't prohibit subsidies, in particular in the area of R&D. The research tax credit in France represents 7 billion euros per year. This could be called also a factor that distorts the international trade as well. And the same thing exists in America as well. All of these different states use this kind of subsidy as a tool to encourage innovation. It's not necessarily against the rules of the WTO, whether it's for electric vehicles. It's true that China has increased by 30% its exportation capacity for electric vehicles, but it still only represents 10% of exports of vehicles. In Europe, it represents 45%. So there is still, the competition is still very much open, and there's a rivalry and economic competition, that is something that exists. The devil isn't always the one that is the easiest to point at. Concerning the need to change the rules, I'll end with that, if you don't mind, David. The point that we were talking about earlier that Thierry was making, Ngaire was talking about the need to find areas of cooperation that correspond to real necessities, and in particular global warming and climate change. This is a key point, and it's in that area that we will perhaps be able to find a new area of cooperation and for worldwide economic governance that will meet a need for the common good. And it's true that states are capable of doing that when they are faced with a desire that is in the common, for the common good. Let me give you another example, as Thierry gave us earlier. I'd like the audience to react a little bit, perhaps. With a microphone, please, otherwise we can't translate the question. That way I won't have to repeat the question. Thank you.
We've discussed whether an economic governance is still possible. I wondered what should be the three main objectives of an efficient economic governance now in the current world, from your perspective? And I ask a question in English so that you get it, but French answers in French, of course, welcome.
Merci beaucoup, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Who would like to answer that one? Lars-Hendrik? Yes, it's a very good question.
Is the most efficient way, but I do think we need to get a political agreement on it. So it's not a question of smart ideas or great think tanks and academics making a great proposal. It's getting an agreement between different interests. And, you know, China is going to play an important role. So is China, you know, willing to give more money is one issue at the government level. Because it's really becoming an economic superpower and not a developing country anymore. That's one issue. Are we willing to give more rights to China in terms of decision making? You know, where the money goes and what China would have to do. You know, and are we prepared to do that? And what was said before, I think, is very important. Do we believe in a world? I think it's, for me, very important. Because I was 10 years in government doing the G20. Do we believe in a world of working together? Sounds a bit stupid, but, you know, climate, do we work together? Or do we believe in a world of more alliances? This is multilateralism, a multipolar, where Europe works closer with America, and you know, and then you have India, you have the Saudis, very strong countries also financially. Are we breaking into different blocks? Or are we capable of having multilateral global institutions? So I'm a multilateralist. I want to preserve these global ones. But then the interesting question is, what is Europe's position? Is Europe, you know, your point, is Europe neutral? Or is Europe, you know, the Chinese want us to be neutral. They think the sovereignty idea from Emmanuel Macron is a great idea because they don't want us to be too close to the Americans. It's obvious. But I think we should not do something because the Chinese want us to do something. I think we need to think about, as Europeans, where do we stand? And I think we want more sovereignty, we want more independence, but I'm personally, both of my children live in the United States. I'm really half of an American, even though I'm German. Of course, America is our natural ally. But America is also behaving America first with Donald Trump. So I think we need to preserve a certain independence from the United States and integrate more into Europe. This is the debate we're having right now. So I think Europe should not be aligned too much. I think we should try to work with everybody, also with India and also with China, trying to solve global problems, because climate and many things are global problems. So these are the two big things now. Are we going towards splitting the world? And where's Europe? Or are we going toward trying to preserve a little bit the old world of working together? That I don't know.
Ngaire Woods, vous optez pour quel scénario, vous?
What is your scenario?
Things that would make, we were asked, 3 things that we would make a successful international organization in the future. So there's the tempting and there's the necessary. So tempting is like-minded countries coming together to agree maximal agreements and use international institutions to force it on as many other weaker countries as you can. And that's a little bit the model that we've been in the world. So the necessary is the reverse of those 3 things. So first, institutions which all countries want to belong to, or a very large number. So not the easy like-minded, but much more universal. Second, minimal rather than maximal agreement that is the most important thing to be done. And third, that you use international institutions to facilitate the cooperation, not to coerce it. So by providing information, by providing verification. So I think those are the 3 qualities for institutions of the future.
Ah, le Dr Yuan veut... Please, please do.
Yes. I believe in market competition. So I think if we want to make the global governance more efficient, we need competition. So that's why we introduce AIIB, BRICS, new NDB, more banks, more options for the countries to join in. And we can compete to each other to improve the efficiency. Thank you.
Une autre question?
Another questions? Question over there. Yes, I have a question. Here we are talking about the rules for world trade and the crisis in world trade rules. Could we imagine that this crisis in world trade rules might have impacts on trade within regions of the world? And here, of course, I'm thinking of Europe. The economic situation isn't very good politically. There's a rise in nationalism and protectionism. Why not find that in Germany, the Italians or the French might be doing things that they don't like? Let's not forget we have the experience of Brexit, which shows at a particular time we may say, I don't like this, I'm leaving. So everything was saying, how does it apply to us in Europe? Thierry, what do you think? How do we see it in our country? My feeling is that this is a question of determination, political will, and the will of the people, therefore. For many years, Europe was presented as the cause for a whole series of difficulties and failures. Everything that was good, it's not only in France. I've done some research. Not only in France. Everything that was good was thanks to the local politicians, German, Italian, Spanish, French. Everything that was a problem, everything that failed, everything that was a barrier came from Europe. And people started to believe that. People started to hear that and to believe that was the case. And for many of them, it became a very strong belief. I think we have to go the other way. And we have to be much more assertive. And when we talk about the advantages of Europe and what Europe can bring us, I have 30 seconds left. Perhaps also Europe should agree to play a different role than the role it plays at the moment. I'm exaggerating a little bit to simplify. The US invents, China manufactures, and Europe regulates. Maybe we could build our prosperity on regulation. Do you think that's possible? Personally, I don't think so. No. Have a question, an answer to that one, FOUREL? Well, fortunately, the European framework today is so dense that it cannot be undone. And we can see that today that our British friends regret the Brexit, which has caused regression over the last 4 years in their country and economically, which is quite obvious. Of course, there remains a lot of areas of competition within Europe, especially on the price of energy. We've heard about this during this electoral campaign. This is a debate that is ongoing, where countries can have their own energy prices, which corresponds to their own costs, or should we have a more harmonization within Europe? This is a debate that is ongoing, and will continue about the level of freedom that each country has concerning economic competition and energy prices, and this is a good thing. I'd just like to come back for a moment to the three things that we could perhaps do to have effective worldwide economic governance. First of all, we need to define a new project for worldwide economic governance. And this is in the area of the climate that we will be able to do this. We need to have a graduation of the tariff barriers so that they correspond to an obligation to act on climate change, and then the financial measures need to be put in place. And this is when William Nordhaus in the Climate Club, who won the Nobel Prize for Economy. If we're able to use these tariff barriers to find new resources, This has to be done to use finance decarbonization and for developing countries, because they are the ones that have the biggest problems to maintain economic competitiveness while remaining in an approach of decarbonization. These are the two major challenges for tomorrow's worldwide economic governance, is to meet the problems of climate change between 2050, to make sure you have the sources of funding so that developing countries are able to follow the decarbonization curve. And I'd like a third one, which is nevertheless to allow freedom for peoples to be able to express their opinion and to make sure that the rules are not only made for the anywheres, so that we're also able to think about the somewheres by giving them guarantees to reduce the precarity that people have to deal with. Thank you very much. I'll hand over now to Ngaire Woods now, who has gave me a little signal to say she's going to be very quick.
Most people in this room probably agree that climate is absolutely urgent to solve, but we have a huge problem, which is that very large parts of the population in this continent and in North America believe that climate is now an elite luxury. They will not join the movement they will not rejoin the movement for climate until their more urgent needs are met. And those goes back to jobs, precariousness, income, housing. So I think we must not believe that climate will provoke global cooperation and solve our problems. Quite the contrary. We have to solve those other problems to bring people back to being able to conceive of being part of a climate solution.
Allez, le dernier mot à Lars-Hendrik RÖLLER.
I agree with that. Yes. I still think it's an interesting idea to think about a project, but I think climate is a tough one. And it comes back to a little bit what we're saying. We have the COP this year. So the COP is a little bit like the global governance on climate, Paris Agreement, you know, big thing. And the number one issue for COP is finance, money for the rest of the world. And are we in that, because that's another, it's first of all, people have to be motivated, that is a big issue. Second one, are we willing? Because they think we are double standards. We have been developing, we have been emitting CO2, it's all cumulative. We are responsible, the West, the rich are responsible for climate change. And are we willing to help them and give them money? And that's important. So I think it needs to be successful to move the world forward. Thank you.
Et le tout dernier mot, very short one.
Last word.
Our conclusion is that China and the US political tensions are very high carbon emission, are not green relationship. Because of the tariffs, additional tariffs between these two countries, the carbon emission could be like 450 millions of tons. So that's, we will publish in Chinese firstly and then in English. Thank you.
Merci. Merci. On peut, je pense, applaudir nos...
Thank you very much. I think we can give our participants a round of applause. Thierry, DEREZ, FOUREL, Lars-Hendrik, RÖLLER, Ngaire Woods, and Qiyuan XU. Thank you very much, all of you, for being with us, and I wish you excellent rencontres.
Attendez.